A man born in a tiny jungle village became the president of an entire country, but what he did next shocked everyone. You probably never heard of Donald Ramotar. He never chased money or fame, yet he led a whole nation. His story is so different from what you expect from world leaders that you have to hear this till the end. Born in a place so remote that most people couldn't find it on a map, this guy ended up running Guyana for 4 years, but he never forgot where he came from. And here's the twist: while other presidents around the world were buying mansions and yachts, Donald Ramotar just wanted to serve his people. Let me tell you about the most down-to-earth president you never knew existed. Donald Ramotar was born on October 22, 1950, in a tiny place called Keria along the Essequibo River. Think about it. This wasn't some fancy city or even a regular town. This was a small community that started as a cotton plantation, surrounded by thick jungle and rivers. His father Sam ran a timber business and a little shop that served everyone in the village. His mother Olive came from mixed African and Amerindian roots. So right from the start, Donald grew up understanding different cultures and backgrounds. He was one of 9 kids in the family, so you know life wasn't easy. They didn't have much, but they had each other. This is important because it shaped who he would become later. When Donald was young, his dad noticed something. The schools in Keria just weren't good enough. So what did he do? He sent young Donald to Georgetown, the capital city, to live with family friends Harry Hansry and Alma Pereira. Can you imagine being a kid from a tiny jungle village suddenly living in the big city? Donald went from climbing trees and helping at his dad's timber business to attending St. Andrew's Kirk School right across from the Parliament buildings. That's where his political journey secretly started, even though he didn't know it yet. Every day he walked past those government buildings going to school, and years later, he would actually work inside them. After finishing high school, Donald went to the Government Technical Institute. Now here's where his life gets interesting. He studied welding. Yes, you heard that right. The future president of Guyana learned how to weld metal together. He wasn't studying law or politics or economics like most future presidents. He was learning a real hands-on skill. And at that technical school, something else happened that changed his life forever. He noticed a young woman named Lakshmi from a village called Huastidiran, but he was too shy to talk to her properly. They just knew each other as students. Little did he know this woman would become his wife and the first lady of Guyana. But before we get to that love story, let's talk about how Donald got into politics. In 1967, when he was just 17 years old, Donald joined the People's Progressive Party. This was a big deal because Guyana was still fighting for better conditions and fair treatment for everyone, even before he could vote. In 1964, young Donald was already out there distributing leaflets and campaign materials for the PPP around his home area. His own dad was helping him do this. Think about that dedication. This teenager believed so strongly in making his country better that he spent his free time campaigning. Donald won a scholarship to study in Europe. He went to the Soviet Union to study political science. This was during the Cold War, remember, when the world was divided. But Donald went there to learn, to understand different systems, to figure out how to help his own country. When he came back to Guyana, he didn't come back with fancy degrees to show off. He came back ready to work. And work he did. For years and years, Donald Ramotar worked behind the scenes. He wasn't looking for attention or glory. Now let's get back to that love story. Years after first seeing Lakshmi at technical school, Donald was on a ferry coming back from a town called Bartica on PPP business. And guess who else was on that ferry? Lakshmi. This time they talked, really talked, and they started a serious relationship. In 1974, they got married. And here's what makes their story special. Lakshmi worked as a nurse at Georgetown Public Hospital for 13 years. She had fixed working hours, and Donald had flexible political work hours. So when she was at work, Donald was home with the kids. Can you picture that? A major political leader changing diapers and cooking meals for his children while his wife worked. They had 3 children together: Lisaveta, Alvaro, and Alexei. The family even lived in Czechoslovakia for 5 years when Donald was sent there to work on a magazine for the PPP. Their youngest child was actually born there. They were building a family while Donald was building his political career, but he never let politics come before his family. His wife Lakshmi later said he was always there for the kids, always helping, always present. That's rare for any busy professional, let alone someone climbing up the ranks of a major political party. Speaking of climbing ranks, Let's talk about Donald's rise in the PPP. In 1979, he was elected to the PPP Central Committee. In 1983, he joined the Executive Committee. These are big positions, but Donald stayed humble. For years, he worked from a modest back office at Freedom House, the PPP headquarters. People described him as humble, quiet, a man without much fanfare who toiled away content to stay in the background. He wasn't the guy giving all the big speeches or appearing in newspapers. He was the guy making sure everything worked smoothly behind the scenes. In the historic 1992 election, the PPP under Chetty Jagan won power for the first time in decades, and Donald was elected to the National Assembly. He finally had an official government position, representing the people. But even then, he kept that same humble attitude. In 1993, he became the PPP's executive secretary. This meant he was now handling the day-to-day operations of one of Guyana's major political parties. Then came a tragic moment that changed everything. In March 1997, President Chetty Jagan died. On March 29, 1997, Donald Ramotar was unanimously elected to succeed Jagan as the PPP's general secretary. This was the top position in the party. Donald had been Jagan's student, his follower, learning from him for years. Now he had to fill those enormous shoes, and he did it by sticking to the same values Jagan taught him, focusing on development and helping ordinary people for the next 14 years. From 1997 to 2011, Donald Ramotar led the PPP as general secretary, but he still wasn't president. He was the power behind the scenes, the organizer, the strategist. Other people were president during this time, but Donald was making sure the party stayed true to its mission. On April 4, 2011, the PPP Central Committee chose Donald as their presidential candidate for the November 2011 election. After all those decades of service, after all that time working in the shadows, the party finally said, "Donald, it's your turn to lead the country." The election happened on November 28, 2011. When results came in on December 1st, Donald won. But here's the catch. The PPP got 32 out of 65 seats, falling one seat short of a majority in parliament. This meant Donald would be president, but the opposition parties together had more seats than his party. Most politicians would panic at this situation. But Donald, he said, the electorate has spoken and we have to work with what we have. He was sworn in as president on December 3rd, 2011. Now here's where his presidency gets really interesting. Imagine trying to run a country when your opponents control the parliament. They can block your budget, reject your plans, make governing nearly impossible. That's exactly what Donald faced every single day for his entire presidency. The opposition voted against the capital budget, and in many cases, Donald had to go through the courts to restore it. They made it incredibly difficult to implement any transformative projects. It would have been easy for Donald to give up, to fight back with anger, or to just do nothing. But that's not what happened. Despite this difficult condition of having an opposition majority in parliament, the economy still grew an average of 5% a year during his term. Let me repeat that because it's incredible. With constant political fighting, with budgets being blocked, with opposition at every turn, the economy still grew 5% annually. There was no mass unemployment, no increase in unemployment, and no decrease in the supply of food. The country kept moving forward. During Donald's presidency, Guyana was recognized as one of only 17 countries in the world that not only cut hunger in half, but also improved nutrition for its people. Think about how amazing that is. While dealing with political chaos at home, the country was still achieving major development goals. They achieved universal primary education and were close to achieving universal secondary education. This means almost every child in Guyana was going to school, getting educated, building a future. Roads were being built to connect remote communities. The roads all the way to Molson Creek were completely rehabilitated. For the first time, there would be all-weather, all-year-round roads into Region 7 and 8, into the Pacaramas. These might sound like simple things, but for people living in isolated areas, a good road means everything. It means you can get your crops to market, your kids can get to school, you can reach a hospital in an emergency. But let's talk about Donald as a person during all this. His wife Lakshmi remembered how he helped with their 3 kids when they were babies, changing diapers, preparing meals, babysitting while she worked as a nurse. After he had spent a day at the PPP office working to secure free and fair elections for Guyana. Even as president, people who met him said he wasn't your average politician. He was open, authentic, and real. He didn't let the power and prestige get to him. He was quite content to serve, to be the president who serves rather than wield power. In 2014, Donald and Lakshmi celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. 40 years of marriage while dealing with all the pressures of political life. That tells you something about the strength of their relationship and Donald's ability to keep his priorities straight. His wife, who describes herself as reserved and not comfortable in the spotlight, supported him, but never let the title of First Lady change who she was. She focused on family, children, and women's issues. She was just as down to earth as Donald. Now I need to tell you about the challenges and the end of Donald's presidency. In 2014, facing a no-confidence motion from the opposition majority in Parliament, Donald made a controversial decision to prorogue Parliament, basically suspending it temporarily. The opposition was furious. Critics said he was avoiding accountability. Supporters said he was trying to prevent the opposition from blocking everything. On May 11, 2015, Donald and the PPP lost the general election to the opposition coalition led by David Granger, which won by a slim margin. President Ramotar left office on May 16, 2015. When Granger was sworn in, after losing the election, something interesting happened. Donald wasn't even included in the list of the PPP's 32 members of parliament in July 2015. After all those years of service, after being president, he stepped aside. He didn't cling to power or position. He just went home. For 9 years, from 2015 to 2024, Donald Ramotar was basically retired from active politics. But what was he doing? He spent time researching and reading about important periods in Guyana's history. From the 1940s to the 1980s, he was studying, learning, understanding his country's past so people could learn from it. Donald admitted he's not such a great writer, but he said he would try not to let that research go to waste. Even in retirement, he was thinking about how to help his country. He became an advocate for changing Guyana's electoral system from proportional representation to a constituency system. He believed this would help reduce racial tensions between different communities in Guyana. Whether you agree with him or not, this shows he was still thinking about solutions to his country's problems. And then in 2024, something surprising happened. 9 years after leaving office as president, Donald returned to active politics after being elected to the PPP Central Committee. At 74 years old, after being out of the political spotlight for nearly a decade, he came back. Not as president, not as a candidate for high office, but as a member of the party committee, ready to contribute again. That's dedication. That's service. Most people would retire and enjoy their grandchildren. Donald came back to help. Now let's address something important. You might have seen titles calling Donald the richest former president of Guyana. Here's the truth, there is absolutely no evidence for this claim. In fact, everything points to the opposite. During his presidency, the economy grew an average of 5% per year. But Donald himself, he's described as a man not infatuated with wealth or the company of the rich. People who knew him said he was humble, quiet, without much fanfare, content with his modest life. Think about this. Donald never had some big business empire. He never owned fancy companies or made deals to enrich himself. His career was spent in political work, union work, and public service. These are not careers that make people rich. Yes, he was president, but being president of a small developing country like Guyana doesn't come with the kind of wealth some people imagine. And Donald's character suggests he wouldn't have tried to use his position to get rich anyway. His whole life story shows a man who cared more about service than money. Let me tell you what makes Donald's story so powerful. In a world where political leaders often seem corrupt, power-hungry, and disconnected from normal people, Donald Ramotar was different. He came from a tiny village. He learned a trade. He married a nurse. He raised 3 kids. He changed diapers and cooked meals. He worked behind the scenes for decades without seeking glory. When he finally became president, he faced enormous obstacles but kept the country moving forward. When he lost the election, he accepted defeat gracefully and stepped aside. He didn't write angry tweets or claim the election was stolen. He just went home, and even in retirement, he kept thinking about how to help his country. He researched history, advocated for electoral reform, and eventually came back to serve on the party committee. This is a man who genuinely believes in service over self. Donald emerged as a prominent advocate of liberalism, actively opposing oppression and standing up for the less fortunate. That's his legacy. Not wealth, not power, but standing up for people who need someone to fight for them. In January 2015, just months before leaving office, Donald was awarded the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman by Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India. This is a prestigious award given to people of Indian origin who have made significant contributions. Donald's father was Indian, his mother was African and Amerindian, and he led a Caribbean nation. He represented the beautiful mixing of cultures that makes Guyana special. So, what can we learn from Donald Ramotar's story? First, you don't have to come from wealth or privilege to make a difference. Donald came from a tiny jungle village and led a nation. Second, real leadership isn't about seeking power or glory. Donald spent decades working behind the scenes, content to serve without recognition. Third, family matters. Through all his political work, Donald never forgot to be a husband and father. Fourth, facing obstacles doesn't mean giving up. Donald governed with an opposition majority, but still achieved results. Fifth, losing gracefully is a sign of strength, not weakness. Donald accepted electoral defeat and stepped aside peacefully. And finally, true service never ends. At 74, Donald could be fully retired, but he chose to come back and help his party and country again. That's the kind of dedication our world needs more of. So next time you hear about political leaders making headlines for scandals, corruption, or power plays, remember Donald Ramotar. Remember the man who learned welding, married a nurse, raised 3 kids, led a country through difficult times, lost an election gracefully, spent years researching history, and came back at 74 to serve again. His story might not be as dramatic as some. He never had billions of dollars or worldwide fame, but he had something more valuable: integrity, dedication, and genuine love for his people. In a world obsessed with wealth and celebrity, Donald Ramotar's quiet dignity stands out. He proved that you don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to make a difference. Sometimes the most powerful leaders are the ones who serve quietly, consistently, and humbly for decades. The man from Keria who became president never forgot where he came from. And that's why his story matters. That's why you should remember Donald Ramotar, not as the richest president, but as one of the most genuine and dedicated public servants you've never heard of until now. Drop a comment telling me which world leader you want to hear about next.